to Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. My name is Lora Cecere. I'm the founder of Supply Chain Insights, and I try to bring you the conversations that you need to know, even though you're probably busy and maybe even on the go in these days of the pandemic. Today, I'm interviewing Stephen Peaslee, and Stephen is the CEO and founder of WickedHyper. And Stephen is going to come to my conference, the Supply Chain Insights Global Summit, on September 7th through the 9th in Franklin, Tennessee, and speak in our track of reinventing transportation. So Steve is looking at how could we use robotics and hyperloop to totally change ocean transport and unloading. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Laura.
Tell the group a little bit about yourself.
I went to West Point, so that's always an interesting starting place. I'm from Maine originally. Served in the Army for about a dozen years, and then had an investment practice for about another 20 years. Most recently, I was a consultant for an transportation infrastructure firm. It was in that role that I found myself starting WickedHyper because of a client request for a better way to do things.
Well, tell me a little bit about that. What is WickedHyper, and what is your mission, and where are you at on building the company?
So I think, again, starting with the name, the wicked part is because I'm from Maine, so everybody from the Northeast will understand that. The hyper was because the initial concept for this was based on hyperloop-related transportation. It's since deviated from that, and we now use what's called hyper-rail transportation, so the WickedHyper name is still apt. A port client, when I was a consultant, asked for a better way to move containers from point A to point B. Better meaning besides conventional drayage or on-dock unit trains. So I got together with one of the Hyperloop companies, which there were about 7 or 8 altogether. They had a concept vehicle for being able to do this, not in a Hyperloop, not in the tube, so to speak, but on a magnetic levitation track. As time wore on, we figured out that we didn't have a way to load and unload these fast enough to keep up with the concept vehicles. So that's when I got out pencil and paper and started designing WickedHyper, initially as a onloading and offloading super crane, so to speak, to handle the hyperrail transports. As the Hyperloop company kind of withdrew and focused more on their core project, which is the Hyperloop itself, we found ourselves being more responsible for the hyperrail aspect of it, as well as the loading and unloading. So today, that's the whole WickedHyper consists of 3 major elements. One is a fleet of automated guidance vehicles or driverless flat trucks. The second part is a giant mega gantry that loads and unloads 40-foot containers at a very fast speed. And then the hyperrail, which transports these containers between the waterfront and an inland container yard.
So where are you in this venture?
About 2 years ago, when I was still working for the consulting firm, and they asked, well, who's going to do all this? And I said, we are. And they said, we don't do this. So I said, well, then I will. And I began the intellectual property paperwork at that time, filing for trademarks and patent protection, beginning in December of 2019. In June of last year, parted company with the consulting firm and started doing this full time. That first port that got this whole thing started, we've done a visioning workshop for them, and we've been on standby now for a little over a year on beginning a feasibility study for them. Obviously, the last year's had its share of delays caused by COVID and other issues. So we have talked to about 3 other ports as far as initial discussions go. We're raising money any which way we can. We're pre-seed right now, but we're also looking to raise our seed round, which will fund our pilot demonstration.
And, with this infrastructure bill, any progress there that maybe we can get this adopted for the heavily congested ports like LA and Long Beach?
Yeah, so the infrastructure bill, using the broader term of infrastructure versus transportation infrastructure, which is how we tend to look at it, the transportation portion of the infrastructure bill is, I'm going to use the word only about $250 billion out of the $1 trillion. The port portion of that is 17 billion. So if you take a new port terminal like the couple that we're talking to different ports about, those run anywhere from $1.5 billion to $5 billion. So 17 billion doesn't spread very evenly around the country for that. What has happened in the past with port infrastructure money is that the lion's share has gone to the larger ports, and that's understandable since they have the big footprint already. And with that big footprint, they also have the bigger problems already, LA and Long Beach being the prime example. But there's other parts of that infrastructure money that will go to expanding, I believe, the what's called the NET Council, the New and Emerging Transportation Technologies Council. They're the ones that gave their blessing to Hyperloop as a legitimate for the future. So that's who we'll be approaching also to get WickedHyper included with that. And the more credibility we gain through those kind of channels, the better off we are. But by and large, the initial big step for us will be to have that demonstration that people can come and see and say, oh, this really does work.
And how far are you away from that demonstration? Because conceptually, I love the idea, but the proof's in the pudding, and supply chain guys and gals are all about details and things that work.
You're right. And luckily today we have several different levels of modeling that we can use prior to getting to a pilot. And some people will be convinced enough, the early adopters, that once they see, say, a virtual reality demonstration, they don't need to wait for the physical model, and they want to get out ahead of the crowd. As far as the physical pilot demonstration, we're probably looking at 2.5 years, 2 to 2.5 years. I would say, to be conservative, on the 2.5 side before we're able to do that. Mostly because the larger gantry cranes that are needed for our system are either manufactured in Europe or China. We don't have that capacity in the US. So it's a long lead time on the procurement for that piece of the puzzle.
Or an opportunity for Made in America, right? Yeah, so let's talk about the why. Because, Steve, I don't know that people that aren't as familiar with ports understand the why. The ships have gotten a lot bigger. The instantaneous load is more stressful. The ports are land constrained. So we're trying to bring more instantaneous volume through ports that just don't have any land. And, the services to product shift that happened with the pandemic, where people were buying more products and fewer services, just really have cramped those ports. So is the concept here that let's just move the containers away from the landlocked condition in an efficient way? Is that kind of the high level promise?
Lora, it's like you wrote this for me. Yes, that's all those factors that you brought up have contributed to a situation now where the problem isn't last mile delivery, it's first mile. We can't seem to get things away from the waterfront. So when you look at LA and Long Beach as the prime example in the US, you have 30, I think I read last week, there were 30 container ships parked out in San Pedro Bay waiting for berth space at the ports. And the ship-to-shore cranes, those giant things that are next to the waterfront, they're able to keep up. They're not the problem. The problem is the containers come out and then they get stacked up on the port ground. And when you have a large ship, it all happens at once. So you can say you do X number of 20-foot equivalent units, TEUs, a year, but it's not spread evenly throughout the year. It comes, as you said, in surges. And those surges are getting bigger and bigger because the ships are getting bigger and bigger. And unfortunately, there isn't a lot of land available at the waterfront, and usually what's there is very expensive. So the thrust of WickedHyper is let's just move all of that away from the waterfront as much as possible to an inland container yard, maybe 10 to 50 miles away from the port, and just have it become an extension of the port. And the land is more available, ostensibly, and generally a lot less expensive. You don't have thousands and thousands of trucks driving through downtown wherever, competing with commuters every day to go in and out of the ports. So there's a lot of different problems that are resolved by doing it this way. And we're not the first one to have this idea. The idea of an inland container yard has been around for a while. The idea of how to execute it is where we've been short.
So will your system also improve visibility of containers? Because chassis and containers are assets and we take them for granted, I think.
Oh, absolutely. It's imperative that when a container gets touched on the ship, before it gets into our hands, while it's in the ship-to-shore crane, that we know what that container is, where it's going, because everything's got to be coordinated in a way that the inland container yard still knows which containers to send to the waterfront, and they know which ones are coming back. In essence, what we're doing is we're replacing traditional drayage at the waterfront. And before all the truck drivers and trucking firms yell that, we're trying to take their work away, all we're doing is we're giving their start point a much easier location than where it is right now. I don't know if that answered your question, Laura.
Well, yes, it did. So, at the Supply Chain Insights Global Summit, where you're going to come and show what this would look like, we're going to ideate on the future of transportation. If somebody is listening to this and wants to help you out, what would you suggest they do as a first step?
Contact us, obviously, steve@wickedhyper.com. We have a website, www.wickedhyper.com. And then the question becomes, what role do they want to play? Do they want to play an investor role, partnership role, that sort of thing? We have we have a very good core team where we have a port industry executive for 35 years as a port director and president of the Association of the Port Authorities. As our COO, we have a former president, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and vice president at General Electric as our president. And then we have a CTO who's been involved in technology and logistics for the last 40 years over in Europe. What we try to do, we look at what we don't have in terms of skill sets and expertise. We try to complement what we have by adding needed pieces. As with any startup, the financing becomes critical early on. So as we're waiting to start this feasibility study, we're raising finances through a pre-seed round right now. We had hoped to avoid that, but we didn't think that the feasibility study would get pushed out as far as it has. So,
Steve, thanks for joining the show. And I hope people contact you, because I think we're so landlocked at the ports that we've got to really invest in automation. And the good news is the automation has come a long way to do that. But I often think about, the warehouse automation where we had robots in the warehouse and we basically would move the product to the picker versus moving the picker to the robot. It took us almost a decade to really adopt, and I'm hoping that people can see the criticality of what we need to do at the ports and invest in new technologies and new ways of working like what you're doing. So thanks for joining the show today.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure, Laura.
Awesome. Until next time, and hopefully we'll see you at the Supply Chain Insights Global Summit. My name is Lora Cecere, and I'm the founder of Supply Chain Insights, and I want to give you a personal invitation to join this year's Supply Chain Insights Global Summit. Now in its 8th year of doing this conference, we designed this for a unique experience for supply chain leaders to learn from technology leaders to think differently and drive new outcomes. We're hoping that you can make it on September 7th through the 9th in Franklin, Tennessee. In the conference, we handpick all of the speakers and we design the conference for a unique networking experience so that you leave to build a guiding coalition for change. We hope to see you there.